Can you guys see okay then? Is that
Yes.
work good? Okay,
Is the
sweet.
camera running?
Yeah, it should be.
Remember. It's
Yeah,
cut
I'm
off your
actually
head.
I'm gonna try to film this ish too. I don't know, in case
Okay.
we ever use it later or
Oh,
something.
you weren't zoomed out.
So I think it's all working. So, do you guys have the notes?
Yes.
Okay, I was gonna ask, do y'all have like a hymnal that you have like two of that both of you guys could use, like the same
Yeah.
one? Which one do you have?
Well, we have the hymnal for worship and celebration, but then we have the Trinity hymnal, a couple of those,
Okay,
Majesty hymnal.
Trinity. We have two of those. Oh, is it the Baptist edition, or do you know?
I think so.
Okay, we could probably use that actually. That would probably work good. I don't think we'll get into that today, but that would be good. So I'll just write that down here. And by the way, this was Paul's idea for everyone, everyone who's here. So you can thank him for all the work that we're gonna go through together. I still haven't
Thanks for doing it, Max.
I haven't decided how much it's gonna cost. You know, I'm still tossing that around. So I'll email you and I'll just let you know.
Whatever you decide.
I'm kidding. So.
Thanks for doing it. Yep.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. So the one thing I was gonna say is, if anyone has any questions, just interrupt and just say, like, just shout out like, "Hey, I'm confused," or like, "That doesn't make sense," or something, so that we can all make sure it's clear. Because probably I misspoke or said something backwards or something. So if anyone has questions, or like if you think of a better way to explain something, we'll just kind of treat it as like a discussion sometimes, you know, where we can toss around ideas and stuff and see what everyone's thinking. So don't be shy to get involved, and we're all going to be hopefully conducting kind of at different times. So we'll see how it works with like the camera. We'll probably have someone video like each person or whatever, and we'll all take turns and stuff, because that's really where you do a lot of learning, is just by watching other people doing it, and we'll all just kind of play around with it and see. So, but yeah, don't be shy to interrupt if something doesn't make sense. So definitely
How do you want to do the conducting with the camera?
we'll just figure that out when we get there. Probably just leave it
Zoom it
here,
out.
and you'll probably just come sit here, and whoever will probably just come sit here or something.
No, I thought like you conducting, because that it's not wide enough.
Oh.
Or is it? Maybe.
It'll probably be okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it'll fit. It'll be okay. I might have to scoot over, or actually I could just tilt this over. I think this is crooked anyways, but that might be. So yeah, so I'll be involved. We'll all just be critiquing each other and laughing at each other and all that stuff. So, and this is just a crash course. It's nothing like intense. Actually, I went back through and was looking for like notes that I took during college and stuff, and I literally have 0 notes from college. I think every class we just showed up and the teacher would just start talking about whatever, and then he'd be like, try this and do this and whatever. So it was all just kind of like trial and error. But I mean, it's helpful because you learn that way and stuff. But I was like, wow, I have no notes. So I just kind of put some notes together from scratch. So we'll probably add to it when we go along and what have you. So, well, let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll just start going through some of these, and hopefully we'll end at a decent time. So we'll start at 4:30. So the goal will be to get done by 5:30. So, all right. So let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this evening and just for the weekend and the chance to go over some of this information about conducting. Thank you for music and just for families that are out there that care about music and that are musical and that try to glorify you by having the right music, and just use our talents and our abilities. Lord, help us to refine them and to make it something that can be used for your glory. And I pray that we wouldn't use it for ourselves, but for you and for the church, and just give us wisdom in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So one of the reasons I'm so excited about this is because conducting is like, it's something that guys who want to serve God really should be interested in, because for one thing, you never know when you'll have the opportunity to just lead music in church, or to maybe even lead like a small singing group or even a choir or something like that. And even women too, really, ladies can be a huge help to any musical group if they even get some of these tools of like conducting or whatever. So it's one of those tools that God can really use to help us better our own voices and just our own musical knowledge, and then to help lead other people too. So we need leaders like that. And a verse that I put at the beginning of the notes here is 1 Chronicles 15:22. I was reading through this section in First Chronicles, and it's really interesting. This verse that I put, it says, and Chenaniah, chief of the Levites, was for song. He instructed about the song because he was skillful. And there's actually this list in First Chronicles 15 and then in chapter 25 that talks about David kind of assigning all the temple musicians. Basically, David wanted to build this temple for the Lord, but God told him that that wasn't his plan for David, and that was going to be his plan for Solomon. But David didn't waste any time. He took that opportunity to get as much prepared as he could for the temple. And one of the things was he set up the temple musicians. And really there was three main people. There was Asaph, and then Jeduthun, who had 6 sons, and then Heman had 14 sons. And Asaph, his 4 sons were told that they were supposed to prophesy anytime the king bid them to. So anytime the king wanted prophesying, which was another word for singing. So they were singers, but the song was supposed to be straight from scripture. Like it was supposed to be songs about God. And so that was Asaph and his sons. Then Jeduthun's sons, he had 6 sons, and they prophesied with harps and sang praises to God. So they were musical with harps, and then they also sang praises to God, which is really what we're supposed to sing. We're supposed to sing returning thanks to God. And then Heman had 14 sons. They played cymbals, which is really cool, and also played psalteries and harps. So a lot of musicians. Total, there was 288 musicians, and the Bible says they were cunning musicians, and they were all involved in the worship at the temple. So all 288 of these people. And if you think about it, David was restoring this temple worship, and it hadn't been there for a long time. So he was taking these people from whatever their other positions had been, like in the military or out being shepherds or whatever. He was taking them from other occupations and bringing them to focus their life and their livelihood on worshiping God in the temple. It's kind of crazy to think about, but they gave up everything that they were doing at that point. And that's kind of a challenge to me, that we should be willing to give up whatever, our life plans are or whatever we're involved in when God makes a calling clear to us, So really cool to study about these guys. So Chenaniah, he was skillful in song, so he actually taught people about the song. There's a lot of lessons from chapter 15. It shows us that we should worship in due order. It's not just supposed to be chaotic. It's supposed to be after God's design. We should worship with joy, not just singing with like a dead face, or like no emotion. We're supposed to really, enjoy singing to God. Their worship included singers, players with cymbals, psalteries, and harps. So there's a lot of musical instruments involved. And then they were told that they were supposed to excel and be skillful. So that's kind of where we are. We're trying to not just, use music, but we're supposed to excel with it and be skillful with it and use it to the best of our ability to glorify God. So that's why this is mandatory for all of us guys, and we're all going to be conducting. We're all going to be jumping into it, because we're trying to excel and be skillful for God's glory. So anyways, lesson 1, we're starting with time signatures. And I'm going to admit, this is probably the most boring of all the lessons because, we're not like diving into leading choirs and conducting and things like that. But this is essential, because if you don't get the time signatures and the basic theory and everything down, then you're not going to be able to really excel that far in the rest of music. And really, if you really understand the time signatures, it can actually be pretty mind-blowing. So it gets pretty deep. So just hang on, and this is foundational, and really get this down pat so that we can go on, and when you get to conducting, it's going to make a lot more sense. So the introduction here, it says lesson 1 focuses on the theory of musical time signatures, which is the foundation of all conducting. The student must grasp this before moving on to the conducting patterns. So when we think of conducting, normally we probably picture someone up there, motioning with their hand or making some kind of hand gesture or something like that. But it starts a long way before that. It starts with the study of the score. So anytime you look at a hymn or a piece of music, you have to start by starting to analyze it. And the first thing you're going to look at is the time signature. And that tells you a lot about the piece. So that's why we're starting here. We're starting with the time signature before we even start interpreting that, or we start making that into music. We're just looking at the study of the score. And it starts with rhythm. And there's a couple books that I recommend. I don't know where everyone necessarily is, where both of you guys are in like your musical education, but if rhythm and time signatures is something that you're not super solid on, this is a really important section. And if you've already learned all this stuff, then just kind of treat it like a review, just kind of going over it again, just a quick refresher on it. There is a good theory book that this is one of the best. I've gone through it a little bit. It's Norton's Programmed Text and Musical Theory, and this one is called Scales, Intervals, Keys, Triads, Rhythm, and Meter. So this is basically just like a ton of practice exercises on meter and rhythm and time signature. It's a pretty thick book, and it's just you can get one used as long as it's not too written in, and it'll just quiz you on all your meter and all your time signatures and things like that. But we're just gonna go over a quick recap of it. It's by Norton Program Text, but the authors are John Clough, Joyce Conley, and Claire Bogue. So it has the authors down here.
Okay.
But yeah, it's put out by Norton's, I guess. And there's different versions of these. You can get one that'll have not all of these. I think there's one that's just like triads, rhythm, and meter, or something like that. This one has like some other things, scales and intervals and stuff. But it's all basically like musical, foundational things like that. So just on our notes, we have basically an overview. So just some things to start getting us thinking about this. Introduction to rhythm. So it's always helpful to have definitions for our terms here. So rhythm is the time aspect of music. You can't have music without having a time aspect because music happens in time. And specifically, rhythm is talking about the duration of pitches, accents, and silences. So sometimes we don't think about all three of those, but that's what rhythm is. You count pitches, and then you count accents, which that's a little bit more than just a pitch. It's an accent. And then you also have to count your silences. So music is very time-oriented, so that's rhythm. The beat is the steady, reoccurring pulse, which can be divided into big beats and small beats. And that's where we're heading. We're going to start looking at the big beats and the small beats. But for right now, just know that the beat is the steady, reoccurring pulse. So every piece of music, every score has a pulse. And then the third definition here, tempo. It's defined as the relative speed of the beat, and the tempo affects how fast the time signature is counted. So the time signature doesn't tell you everything you need to know. You have to analyze more things like the words and the length of the measures and things like that to see what your tempo should be. But the time signature just tells you a lot. It tells you about the rhythm, and it'll tell you what beats should be emphasized, the natural accent of each measure. And that's really what all the composers think about when they're writing a piece of music. They're thinking about the words and which words are accented, and then they fit that into a meter, and they fit it into measures, and these separated by bars based on what they want to accent. So if we're going to look at a piece of music without anyone telling us, what they want to emphasize or what they want to accent from that piece of music, we have to understand the rhythm and the meter to understand what they're trying to accent so that we don't get it wrong, so that we don't misrepresent the piece. And that's really just the natural way of representing music. So note values here. Notes are simply durational symbols which indicate rhythmic notation. So that just means these are the symbols that we use to show how long the pitches last, how long the accents or the silences last. So both notes and rests are named to show relationship to each other. I didn't have a picture of the rests, but they follow the same names as these notes, and then they have the same amount of time relative to the other notes. So the whole note is the first one there. You can see how it's just a hollow note head. Then you have the half note, which lasts half as long as the whole note does. Then the quarter note, and then the eighth note with one flag on the stem. And then the 16th note is going to have the two flags on the stem, and those both have the filled in note heads. So all these notes, I like this name system. There's other naming systems, like in Europe they use like the quaver and the semiquaver and all these other names and things. It's just hard to think of because you're trying to think of what's half of what, you know. But when you just have a whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth note, it's just all math, you know. So how long do the notes last? How long are the note values? It's not necessarily a simple answer, but you have to think of it in terms of relative to each other. Okay, so the durations of notes are relative to one another on the beat. So your time signature dictates how many beats you have. And then once you know how many beats you have, then you can determine how long each of these notes gets of the total number of beats. So you just have to think of it in terms of like math, where this is going to be half of this, and you play this for twice as long, and then there's a silence. So just remember that they're relative to each other, and it all depends on the time signature. The note values also change depending on which note equals one beat. So just because you have two songs with a whole note in each song doesn't mean that the whole note's going to last the same amount of time, because in one song the whole note might get a different number of counts than in another song. And then the third note here, among other things, the time signature shows which note is one beat. So that's why the time signature is so helpful, because it tells us so much information. It's going to tell us which note gets one beat, and it helps us to figure out the stresses and the accents and things like that. Dotted notes here, this is another type of note you can have. The dot always adds half of the note's original value again. So you can have pretty much a dotted anything. If you have a dotted half note, it's gonna be a half note plus a quarter note amount of length. So if the half note gets 2 beats, then it's gonna get 3 beats when you add the dot to it. So you just take half of the original number and you add it again. Then the dot does not equal a specific number, but it's a formula. So you have to keep that in mind. It's not necessarily, add one more count, because it doesn't work for every note value. So it's a formula. You just take half of what you would have, add it again. So that's the dotted note. So any questions on page 1? Any comments or things that could be said better? No? Okay, good. Just kidding. So tied notes. These are really, really nice. The tie functions by adding 2 note values together. So you can see already, like, we have a ton of combination of note values and different types of notes, different ways to write things. So this is just another tool to use here. Tied notes must be on the same pitch, otherwise it's a legato, which means if you have the same marking, but it moves from one note to another, then it's just trying to smooth the transition from one note to another. So that's not functioning as a tie. So the tie is always just going to be between 2 notes of the same pitch, or 2 or more notes of the same pitch. Multiple ties can be used successively to chain multiple notes. So you can have a bunch of notes tied together. And you don't play those notes again. They're just tied together. So it just it adds all those values together. It just keeps that note ringing until the next musical notation. Triplet notes, rather than dividing values by 2, the triplet divides by 3. It is notated by a 3 above a beam, or a bracket with a 3 if there is no beam. So if you have like beamed notes, like we were talking about the 8th note and the 16th note, how they have a flag. The 8th note has one flag, but if you have 2 8th notes, you can connect it together with a beam. So that would be kind of like, you have one 8th note, you could write it with a flag. And if you have another 8th note with a flag, you could just take away both flags and connect that with a beam. Okay, so if this was going to be a triplet, then what it would look like is it would have 3 notes in here. It would have a 3 on top of it, but that would equal the same value as the original 2 8th notes, like that. So this triplet, even though it has a 3rd note, it lasts for the same amount of time as this note down here. I don't know if that's easy to see or not. So they would last for the same amount of time. You just indicate it with a 3. That way you know this isn't, 3 and this is 2. This is actually counted for 2, but you have to sneak a 3rd one in there. And this is just the same amount of time, but it only gets 2. So that's what the triplet is about. It's either going to be with the beam, or if these are not eighth notes, if they're just quarter notes, it's going to have the same amount of time as 2 quarter notes, but then it's going to have a bracket over it like that, so that it doesn't mess with the note value. It's just indicating that those 3 are in one group that equals the same amount of time that 2 would equal. So triplet notes, it adds a little bit of syncopation to the song. It gives some variety and some interest, and it's normally unexpected. You don't want to use it too much, but it really is nice when it's used correctly. So now going into meter. So that's kind of an overview of the note values. That's the different combinations you can have. That's what you'll see mostly in hymns and things like that. So now meter, the first note here, it says, you must have an accent to group beats in a meter. So in every measure, there's going to be a built-in accent. That's just how music works. So a measure is one time through the specific meter. So every time you look at a hymn and you see the top line and it's divided by bars, one measure is one time through a specific meter, and then it just repeats that meter over and over as you go throughout the song. In similar meters, the difference is the metric accent. Okay, so we'll look at that a little bit. Don't worry too much about that right now. Now the divisions of the meter. This starts out being pretty straightforward here. So quadruple meter has 1 accent beat followed by 3 unaccented beats. Okay, so I'll just write that up here. This might be easier to visualize than verbalize. Okay, so you have, this is going to be quadruple. It's going to be like big, small, medium, small. That's basically what it's going to look like. You have one measure of this. There's going to be 4 counts, but only the first one is accented. So that's what quadruple looks like. Triple meter is going to be big, small, small. So 1 accented beat followed by 2 unaccented beats. Now I'm not going into which time signatures these all work with yet, because there's multiple options and there's things that cross over and things. So this is just kind of categorizing different options that we have. So you have a lot of different types of quadruple meter, but they're all going to fit this pattern. Then you have the triple meter, which is basically simplified to 1 accented followed by 2 smaller beats or 2 unaccented beats. Then you have duple meter, which has 1 accented beat followed by 1 unaccented beat. So you just have a big, small. Okay, now all of these repeat though, so that's where it gets a little bit trickier. Obviously you'll have a bar line in between these, but this just keeps going, you know. So there's another big, small, another big, small, and it keeps going. So you can get kind of confused sometimes between 2 measures of duple meter and 1 measure of quadruple meter. But the difference is this one right here is basically unaccented. It's a medium beat. It's not stressed a lot. It doesn't feel like a pulse necessarily. The pulse just feels like this one. And then down here, this is a big beat. Okay, so there's a difference between 2 measures of duple meter and then 1 measure of quadruple meter. That's what that third point under the differentiating between meters. It says in similar meters, the difference is the metric accent. That's what that's talking about. So this is similar to this, but the accent is going to tell you. So even if you're given like a piece of music that doesn't have any measures in it, and you have to figure out, you know, what time signature this is in like some kind of theory test or something, you can figure it out basically just by determining where the accent is. And if it only has 1 main pulse, 1 big accent, and then the 3 counts after that are relatively small or medium, then you know it's going to be quadruple. Whereas if you have a big, then a small, then a big, then a small, that's definitely a duple meter. So that's kind of what these divisions of meter is all about. Now this whole... Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, how would you determine what accents there are in the song? Like if you're saying you're just looking at it and you're determining that?
You're like saying without a measure, if there are no measures?
Yeah, I guess. whatever example you're just giving, were you saying they're noted in there, or if there's nothing, and I don't know, are you going by that?
It's basically, it would become obvious by how the notes are naturally grouped together. So like say you could have an example of, here, I'll just write this small down here. You could have okay, so if you had something like this, I'll hold this a little closer. You can tell there's 1, 2, 3, and then this one gets 2, and then you add half of it again, so it gets 3. So this is divided into 2 groups of 3. You know, so if that was one measure, it would be divided into 6. You know, so it's like 6 with the quarter note getting 1 count. So then you could say that that's 6/4. So you can kind of figure it out, you know, just based on how it's written. You can see visual like groupings, like these 3 are similar and this one is similar. Or you could say this is 2 measures of 3/4, you know, and put a measure there. You know, so that's basically, but you could never call this like 4/4 or something, you know, because it just doesn't work, you know. But thankfully we don't really have to worry about that too much. That's just if you're like actually like majoring in music or something and you have to figure that out. That's how you figure out the difference basically. And then you would say, you know, well, normally the first one is accented, so that's going to be a pulse. That's a big note value, so that's probably a pulse. You know, so I would call this like a 6/8 because that's 2 pulses. But this note is never going to be a main accent. You know, the third note right before a big note. That, you know, the way it's written, the way it groups together, it wouldn't end up being that way. So yeah, if basically just by looking at how the notes are written, and you can kind of start in your mind dividing how it would fit into a time signature. But when you're looking at like a hymn, for example, and you have music that has measures and everything, then you have all the answers already. So that's the nice thing about just directing when you understand the time signature and you can read the hymn how it's written. But understanding things like this, it's helpful because, you know, sometimes you'll look at a hymn and it's called, you know, 6/4, and it's like, why is it 6/4? You know, but understanding the foundation of this stuff, it'll help you understand, oh, so they're wanting me to conduct it like this. They're trying to emphasize this pulse, and this is another big beat. This is a small beat. You know, that way it just keeps it all in track, basically. So the next thing, though, this whole chart is all talking about the big beat. So that's important to understand, okay? So the division of the meter, the quadruple, triple, and duple, is talking about the number of groupings of beat per measure, which it's just simpler to call it the big beat, you know. So it's the number of groupings of the beat per measure. Now, the other aspect of this is we have simple versus compound meters. Okay, so simple meter has a duple subdivision of the beat. Okay, so you take these big beats, and each of these big beats can get divided into what you call subdivisions. These are all main divisions, and then you have subdivisions. So compound, which is sometimes called complex. I was taught that it was called complex, so half the time I call it complex. That kind of meter has a triple subdivision of the beat. Now this is talking about the number of subdivisions per beat. Pardon the typo there. Subdivisions per beat, or subdivisions of beat per grouping, which is called the small beat. Okay, so quadruple, triple, and duple meter can be simple or compound. So let's just take quadruple and try to understand this concept here. Okay, so you can take this, and let's say we'll just start out simple here. 4 quarter notes is what we're given, okay? So we would say, okay, so that's 4 quarter notes. The first one is going to be accented, you know, so it's big, small, medium, small, and then you repeat it over and over. So each of these naturally can be divided into an eighth note, you know, and then, you know, that's how each of these is broken up. So you can basically, you can tap this beat, but then you can, I can't snap fast enough, but you can snap 2 per note here, and that happens naturally. Okay, so this would be, you would call this whole thing a simple type of meter, because each note is broken down into two notes. It can be divided in half. It's not like thirds or anything. You'd have to deal with triplets to get it into thirds. So you don't have to worry about anything else. You just look at this and you say each of these notes, it's just a normal note. It's going to be divided into groups of 2. And so it's simple, simple quadruple because there's 4. Now we could take the same type of meter, the same big beats, and let's say we're given, I don't know, say we're given this. Now that's a little awkward, but it's just for example here. Now these can't naturally be divided into 2. How do you take a dotted note and divide it into 2? So you'd have to divide one of these into 3 of these, because that's what the dot, it adds half of it again. So it's not just 2, you get a third one now. So this is now divided into 3. So what you would end up with is you'd have 3 of these for every note. So that means you'd have that times 4 equals 12. Okay, so you have 12 subdivisions of the beat. Okay, still 4 big beats, so it's still quadruple, but since each of them is divided into groups of 3, now we're not dealing with a simple type of meter. This type of meter is called complex or compound, because the way that it's divided is into groups of 3. So that's basically the difference between simple and compound meters, and we're going to look at how that plays out here on the last page here. So time signatures. Now we're going to jump into time signatures. So we've kind of got some groundwork here with some notes, some different types of meter. Time signatures are indicated at the, wow, my marker is dying. So you have your clef here. Time signatures are indicated right at the beginning. So you'll have either 4, 4, or 6, 8, or 3, 2, or whatever. So the time signature will be indicated right away, right at the top of the piece. And it tells you 2 numbers, obviously. So the top number is the meter, or how many beats are in each measure. Now the tricky part is this will either be big beats or small beats. It's not necessarily, you don't know yet which one it is. Okay, so either big beats or small beats, but it tells you how many beats per measure. The lower number indicates the note value that gets 1 beat. Okay, this will also be either the big beat or the small beat. Okay, so you know what the top number is and what the bottom number is. Now here's some tips to help us understand this. In simple meter, so this is the type of meters that can be divided into groups of 2. In simple meter, basically like the even meters instead of the odd meters. In simple meter, the lower number is the number of beats in a whole note. So that's kind of just a tip. You can think of it that way. So like, I'll just tell you, 4/4 is a simple meter. So if you know that, then the lower number is the number of beats that a whole note gets. And it also names the note value that gets 1 beat. So you can look at this lower number and say, okay, so a whole note will get 4 beats. Or you can say that, since you can treat it like a fraction, like it's something over 4, so it's like a fraction. So that means a quarter note gets 1 beat. So since it's like something over 4, you just divide it by 4. That's a quarter note, gets 1 beat. So that's a way to think of it in simple meter. In compound meter, the lower number is the subdivision of the beats. And 3 of that lower number value, the lower number note value names, equals 1 beat. That's a really wordy way to put it. I need to think of a different way to say that. So basically, that's 6/8 here is a compound meter, complex meter. This is a simple meter. So that's how it works with simple meter. It tells you 4 counts per whole note. The whole note gets 4 counts, or you can think of it as 1/4 note, 1/4 of a note gets 1 count. It's saying the same thing. But when you know that it's a compound meter, so 6/8 is a compound meter. So now looking at this, it tells us the lower number is the subdivision of the beat, and 3 of that type of note gets 1 beat. So that's an eighth. So if you take 3/8 notes, so you have 3/8 notes, that equals 1. Okay, so 3/8 notes equals 1 count, and that's the same thing. You could also say equals a dotted half note gets 1, because two of these would equal 1. Oh, sorry, actually, one of these. So these are eighth notes. 2 eighth notes equals a quarter note. That third eighth note gives you the dot. And so a dotted quarter note, is that right? Okay. Dotted quarter note gets 1 count. Okay. So you have to do a little bit more math with these complex ones, these compound ones. But just knowing that 6/8 is compound, and we'll figure out like how you come to that conclusion, but this is just some tips right off the bat here. The bottom number, 1/8, you have to multiply it by 3, because remember, these are the ones that get divided by 3. Okay, so they're divisible by 3, so there's really 3 of them in there, and you have to get all 3 of them together to get your 1 count. You have to put them together, because really what's happening here is this is not telling you, it's telling you how many counts per measure and which note gets 1 count, but it's telling you the small beat. It's not telling you the big beat. So that's why you have to multiply it by 3 to get back to the big beat. Because there's no easy way to write, a dotted quarter note here. So they have to subdivide it out, and they give you the divisions of 3 to write it out this way. So basically that's what this point here is saying, how you read the compound meter. Now, if you're going to find all this out, basically, and we're going to do one of these exercises, all you need to know is you start by trying to determine the beat. So basically the bold words here at the bottom of page 2. So you find the big beat, that's the first thing. Then you find the division of the beat, that's the second thing. Then it's going to tell you the name of the time signature. Then you have the time signature itself. And the name of the time signature is just talking about, you have to have 2 words. The first word is going to be either simple or compound, and the second word is going to be quadruple, triple, or duple. So you can have simple quadruple, simple triple, simple duple, or compound quadruple, compound triple, compound duple. That's the name of the time signature, those 2 words. And then those words will tell you what the time signature is once you put all that information together. So I know this is kind of confusing right off the bat, but it'll make sense as we go, and then as we do some of these exercises and things like that. So basically the last thing on this page, it talks about compound or common abbreviations for time signatures. So the C, it stands for 4/4, just because that the C actually stands for common, and 4/4 is like the most common time signature. And then the C with a line through it, it stands for cut time, which is always going to be 2/2. So yeah, I know I couldn't make the line go straight down through the C. It's sideways. Actually, I probably could have, but I didn't put that much work into it. So those are, if you see those, that's what it is. Just think of the C as 4/4. The C with a line through it is 2/2. So this is some examples of time signatures to make all this hopefully make sense. Okay. The top number, as we've already said, is the number of beats. So divisions for simple or subdivisions for compound in each measure. So you can never go wrong with that. If you see any of these, there's going to be four beats per measure. There's going to be 6 beats per measure. You just don't know if those 6 beats are going to be the main beats or if it's going to be like some of the smaller beats repeated, you know. There's always going to be 3 main beats, you know. The bottom note number is the note value that receives 1 beat, okay, which can be either the division again or the subdivision, but it is the note that gets 1 beat, whether that be the small beat or the big beat. Simple versus compound meter differences. So this is helpful to kind of see it laid out a little bit here. The top expression is the division of the beat. So what you see on top is going to be the division of the beat. What you see on the bottom is going to be the subdivision. Now, you'll notice with simple meter, normally the music is written already expressing the big beat, already showing you the main division of the beat. With these compound meters, it's normally hidden. The main division of the beat is hidden, and what's written is the subdivision, because like I said, with 6/8, when you write 6/8, there's no way to write a number that represents a dotted note value in the actual time signature. So normally it's just written, it's like they basically write it double speed, but they put, you know, bigger numbers over here that still matches it, you know. But the top, so like for that 6/8 example there, the top example that you see is the division of the beat, but that's not what's written in the music. You have to figure out the division of the beat. And you're actually looking at, in the music, you're looking at the subdivision of the beat. And then for simple meter, over beside it, it's the opposite. You're given the main division of the beat, and then you have to think through and figure out what would naturally be the subdivision of the beat. Does that make sense?
I got the second part.
So, yeah, it's just a difference of different time signatures. Sometimes when you're reading a time signature, that is the big beat. And this does affect how you conduct it, because we always conduct the big beat, normally. Like 95% of the time. You almost can't ever say always when you're talking about conducting, because there's always like exceptions. And then the more comfortable you get with it, you can kind of do your own thing. But starting out, we'll just say you always conduct the big beat. So what that means is if you have a simple meter, then you're going to be conducting basically the notes that you see. When you have a hymn or something that has a compound meter, you're going to actually cut through a lot of those notes, and you're going to basically throw 2/3 of them away, and you're only going to conduct 1/3 of them, because 1/3 of that is actually the big beat. That's the pulse that the writer wanted you to feel.
Okay.
So that's basically the idea here. There is a helpful video. So I think watching the video would be helpful. There's not really a good way that I can think of to play it like right now. Because he gives examples, actually, like it's this. So this is a video on their website. So it'll take you right to their website. You can watch their video there. And they also have a helpful download, a PDF that you can save. And it shows and explains 13 time signatures. So they went through 13 of the most common, 13 is a lot of time signatures. You can break it down to like 3 of the most common time signatures. But they go through like the top 13, and they show you what the name is. You know, is this quadruple simple, you know, or is this compound duple? You know, and they show you the name for it. They show you how it's divided. They're showing you what's going on. Are you told the main divisions, or are you told the subdivisions, and you have to figure out the main divisions? You know, or for this one, you're told the main divisions, and then naturally each of those can be divided in half. So it's a helpful thing to go check out there. It might explain it differently. They do use different names for notes, but seeing it and hearing it from a different perspective would probably help. Just kind of think it through, because this is kind of, it's a little bit mind-blowing. It's a little bit deep when you're just looking at a time signature and trying to figure out what it's saying, like what's actually going on there. So that's why we're starting here, because it gets a lot easier from here, because once we understand this, and once we think about this for a week, you know, we'll come back next week having done some of these exercises, and we'll be a lot more comfortable with, okay, this is what's going on in this piece, and now this is how I can represent it with my hands and with my expressions and things like that. So notice down here this chart here, simple versus compound meter. Here's a chart that gives you some of these. Now, the way that they do this is they start out with what we used to have up here. You know, we had the quadruple, triple, duple. They start with those, but they go through the simple one and the compound one. Okay, so simple duple, the meter signature is going to be 2/4 because the simple duple is telling you that it's going to have 2 counts and it's going to be simple, which means the notes have to be divisible by 2. So you see the beat unit and then the division of the beat. Okay, now compound duple, so that means duple, but it's going to be divided into something of 3. The compound duple meter signature is going to be 6/8, and kind of like this example here, the beat unit, which most of these songs are not going to be actually written in, but you have to figure this out. The beat unit is going to be the dotted quarter note there as it is written, and then the division of the beat would actually be these 2 groups of 3 notes. So it's 2 groups of notes. That's why the beat is actually on each group. So there's only two beats really. It's just a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But you feel it in 2 pulses. You're not feeling, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're not feeling all 6 beats. So it's written longhand, but it's really just representing 2 pulses. Whereas that first example, the simple duple, 2/4, it's going to be written in the beat unit normally. Or sometimes they'll throw some flowery notes in there, but you can feel there's only really 2 beats going on. Then he goes down to simple triple. Okay, so this is just 3 beats that you can cut in half. So that's 3/4. You got your 3 notes there. You can cut each of those in half. Then compound triple. Again, it's going to have a dot there because, you're going to figure out, okay, well, when you group these 3 together, it's going to be something dotted. Okay, you group these 3 together, it's going to be dotted. So you have the dotted quarter note again. Now this is 9/8, which is actually pretty common, 9/8. So eighth notes, there's going to be 9 eighth notes, but really you divide both of those by 3. The 8th note, when you take 3 of those and then you put it into the bigger note, is going to actually give you a dotted quarter note. The 9 counts, you divide that by 3 because they're in groups, and there's really only 3 beats going on. So you have to divide each of those numbers by 3 in a certain way. So the division of the beat, what you'll probably see written in that hymn is going to be like, it'll be like, find something to beat on here. It'll be like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's how the pulses will feel. Almost like a lyrical waltz or something like that, because there's extra notes in there, but you're only feeling the pulses on the groups together. Then you got your simple quadruple, compound quadruple. And again, for these compound ones, you have to think that the number that you're seeing is not actually the big beat. You have to divide it by 3. So you divide this one by 3, and then the way you divide this one by 3 is you take that 8th note and you put 3 of them together, and then you end up with this guy. So
okay.
That's basically that. So the exercises here, what it's going to end up being is just some questions to answer, just to kind of think through the notes that we've gone through. Let's work on exercise 2. We can do maybe 1 or 2 of these before we go. This is just a chart that really, it's not like you're going to sit down with a hymn and have to actually think through all this stuff, but this forces you to think it through right now so that it'll just become second nature when you look at a hymn. You're like, oh, that's what's happening. So let's start with that first example. And this is what I said. Where did I say this? Like at the bottom of page 2, that third bullet point up there, where I said define the time signature by looking only at the music. You start by figuring out the beat, then you figure out the division, then you figure out the name, then the time signature. That's what we're doing here. So beat, division, name, time signature. So down at the chart, you got what it should say at the top there, the titles. It should say beat and meter type, then beat note, which is the big beat, then the division, which is the small beat, then time signature.
It would be easier if you had big beat division, small beat subdivision, because you're calling
True.
You're calling the small beat a division when we've been calling it subdivision.
Okay, yeah, that is confusing. So think of the big, so from now on, let's just call the big beat the division, and we'll call the small beat a subdivision. So for that third column, you can just put sub in front of division, subdivision. That way it'll kind of keep us all straight on the same page. Because the terminology does get confusing because you're like, well, subdividing some things and dividing some things. So yeah. So division will be big beat. Subdivision will be small beat. Okay, so now that we got that figured out, we're given the time signature for this one, which we know is 4/4. Now this is really probably the most realistic example on this page because this is what happens with a hymn. You're given the time signature. Okay, so you know it's 4/4 because that's the common time there. That means 4/4. So now let's figure out the beat note. So the beat note, which would also go by division, which would also be the big beat, that second column. What note, if we know that 4/4 is the time signature, what note value would get one beat?
Quarter note.
Yes, quarter note. So you can just draw that in there, quarter note. And then we know that a quarter note, if that's the big beat, then what would be the small beat of a quarter note?
Eighth note.
Yes. 2/8 notes. Yeah,
Yeah.
2/8 notes. And then based on that, so when we compare the 2/8 notes and then the 1/4 note, we know that is this going to be a simple or a compound type of meter?
Simple.
Simple, yeah, because it's just divided into half. It can be cut in half. Simple. And how many counts is this getting? How many big beats would there be? How many of those quarter note would there be? Yeah, Charlie said 4. Yep. Yeah, you guys got it. 4. So then your name for that would just be simple quadruple. So that's the answer for the first one. Does that make sense? Kind of how you work through this? Let's do that second one because this will be, it kind of stretches your brain a little bit to think things through like this. So we're told simple triple, okay? Simple. Phew. Don't have to worry about anything, any groups of 3 or multiplying or anything like that, okay? So simple triple. Well, that means how many big beats are going to be in this time signature? If it's
1.
simple and then there's triple, it wouldn't be 1. The second part of the name is going to tell you how many counts it's going to get.
Just the triple meaning.
Yeah, I think you had it.
3 beats.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, be 3?
Yeah, it's 3 because of the triple. Since it's simple, then you can look right at the second word, and triple is going to mean there's just 3 beats, you know. So 3, you can go all the way down to the time signature box and put 3 on top. Now, we don't know the bottom number yet though, but we're told the beat note. So the beat note is a half note. So that means the half note gets 1 beat. So you think of that in terms of a fraction, half note. So 1/2, 2 is on the bottom of the fraction, and so 2 is going to be the bottom number of your time signature. So you already have 3 on top, so now you can write 2. Might be helpful for me to do this too. So, let's see, we gotta do it like this. Okay, so we're told the name here. So, because it's triple and it's simple, that means, wow, that was messy. 3 on top because triple. So triple tells us 3. And then this told us half note. So since that's 1/2 note, that means we're going to get a 2 on the bottom. So that's the time signature is 3/2. And another way to think of it is how many half notes are in a whole note, because this is simple. So there's 2 half notes in a whole note. And so that means you're going to put 2 down here because that tells you how many counts a whole note would get. So there's different ways you can think of it, whichever way is more helpful. So now we're just trying to figure out the subdivision here. And since it's simple, we're just going to divide this by half. And so we can just put 2 quarter notes. Yeah. Let's do a different one. Ooh, let's do that, the second from the last one. We can finish up with this one. So, we're told... 3, and we're told 12 something. Oh boy.
This is a triplet.
Yeah, you have it as a triplet.
Yeah, I have it as a triplet. It doesn't really matter if it is or not. So, since there's 3, that means automatically this isn't going to be a simple time signature. It's going to be a complex one. Complex. So now we take 3, because we know that this is the longhand version. This isn't actually big beats. This is 12. So 12, we have to divide that by 3 in our head to figure out how many real beats there are. So 12 divided by 3 gives us 4. So this is quadruple. So complex quadruple. So I figured the whole name out just based on the information that was given, because this is 3, so I already know complex. And so that means that's the subdivision. So we got to divide that 12 by 3. So now we have quadruple, okay? So if that is... Oh, and then now we take this column and determine the bottom number. Okay, so this is 3, what kind of note?
8th note.
3 eighth notes. So that means 8 is going to be the number on the bottom here. And that's a really important thing to grasp here. The difference, really the only difference between simple and complex, or the main difference I would say, is for complex, you take this, determines your bottom number. For simple, this determines your bottom number. Does that make sense? Because the time signature for a simple is based on the main beats. The time signature for complex is based off the subdivision. So the small beat is what you're actually being told. And so now what would our big beat be for this one if you take all 3 of these and put them together?
Dotted quarter.
Yeah. Perfect. Dotted quarter note. And the reason why there's this difference, because you can indicate the main beat in simple, because you can indicate a half note by writing 2, but you can't indicate a dotted, you can't write like dotted quarter note in a time signature or something. You can't, there's no way to indicate that, or like 4 with a half, you can't indicate that any other way, or 4 plus 2, or whatever you would say. There's no way in music to indicate that. So we have to multiply everything out by 3 and write it the longhand way. So this is the longhand way, all because it's complex. But once you start doing these, really the complex ones actually get pretty easy, because you just start figuring out, oh, okay, I see a group of 3, so that's going to be complex. So just divide everything by 3, and then you figure out your notes. Or if you're given the notes, okay, just multiply everything by 3, and now I get the time signature. It's going to be big numbers because it's you're being told the subdivision instead of the main division. So what I'll have you guys do is just go through the rest of that chart anytime this week, and then you have your questions up there for exercise 1. If you do want to check the chart, I only put part of this chart. This chart actually came from one of Dr. B's music theory lessons, lesson 6. And so I put the link right there in the document. Obviously not the document you printed out, but if you go back to the email and click on the in your computer, it'll take you to the video. Actually, I think to the exact point in the video where he's going through these answers, and you could check the answers yourself, because we won't really have time to check them together. But obviously, if you have questions or whatever, we can talk through them. But I'm not planning on going through all the answers and everything. And if you want more review on rhythm, note values, and time signatures, I recommend the lesson right before that he does. It's really good. It goes through note values, triplets, and meter. Basically, kind of similar layout of what we went through just now. So he starts with the note values, goes through meter, different types of simple meter and compound meter. I also recommend watching that video from the Music Theory Academy, and you can check out their PDF, and it'll just give you some ideas of that's almost like a good cheat sheet to tell you what kind of time signatures go by what name and how you divide them out and stuff. So that'll be it for now. And then next week, sometime when we start next Saturday, we'll get into more of the technical side of conducting, which will be really cool. We'll start actually getting active here. So, do you have any questions over